when my son's fiancée pulled me into my own kitchen and whispered, "Please don't tell him how you know my father." I felt 22 years old again. Old shame has a way of waking up fast. Her fingers were cold on my wrist, even though the house was warm from the oven and the bodies and the laughter floating in from the dining room. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic butter was in the air. My good tablecloth was on the table, and my son was in the next room, telling a story with that big laugh of his. But in that little square of linoleum between the sink and the refrigerator, it was just me, her, and a last name I hadn't said out loud in almost 3 decades. Parker. She had his last name. She had his eyes too once I let myself see it. I pulled my wrist back gently and made myself breathe. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest like it was trying to step into the conversation. "Why don't you start?" I said quietly, looking her right in the face. "By telling me what you think I know." Her eyes went glossy, and for a second I saw a scared little girl standing where this grown woman in a cream dress and engagement ring stood. Her mouth open like she might actually tell me the whole thing right there next to the sink. Then I heard my son call from the dining room. "Ma, you okay in there? We good on drinks?" He sounded so happy. I swallowed whatever I was about to say, smiled at him over her shoulder like nothing in the world was wrong. "We're fine, baby," I called back. "Y'all just keep talking." When I turned back, she was already pulling herself together, wiping at the corner of her eye with a quick swipe. "Please," she whispered again, voice rough. "Don't ruin this for him. Or for me." I didn't answer her right away, because the truth was I didn't know yet whether I was going to ruin anything at all. I just knew that the past I thought I'd buried had come to sit at my dinner table and call me Miss Denise. Before that night, my life was simple in all the small ways that matter. I'm 54 years old. I work as an office manager at a dental clinic, which is a fancy way of saying I know where every file, every pen, and every person is supposed to be at any given minute. I wear comfortable shoes, carry a big purse full of everybody's business but my own, and come home to a little 2-bedroom house with creaky floors and more quiet than I always admit I feel. My son Marcus is my only child. I had him at 23, and it's like my whole life split into before Marcus and after Marcus. Before him I was always reaching for something, the right man, the right attention, the right feeling. After him, my world narrowed down to making sure that little boy had heat in the winter, shoes that fit in the fall, and a mama who didn't fall apart in front of him. We grew up together in a lot of ways. I worked days at the clinic and nights at a call center for a few years, cooked what we could afford, and learned how to patch drywall from YouTube when he put a hole in the wall with a too enthusiastic basketball game in the hallway. On Saturdays I made pancakes, sometimes thin because the milk was low, and we'd sit at our chipped little table, syrup in the good mug because we didn't have a proper pitcher. "Ma," he'd say, mouth full, "when I get rich, I'm gonna buy you a house where the floor don't squeak nowhere." "I like my squeaks," I'd tell him. "They tell me where you're sneaking off to." He'd laugh and run down the hall on purpose, the boards giving him away every step. I did my best to be honest with him, but like a lot of mothers, there were some parts of my story I left in the dark. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't want my mistakes to be the map he followed. He knew his father and I didn't work out. He knew we'd split when he was still in diapers, that his daddy moved 2 states over and only called on holidays when his new wife reminded him. What he didn't know, what nobody but God and a very small handful of people knew, was that in the middle of all that hurt, I had tried to fill a hole in the worst way possible. With another woman's husband. I had just taken the chicken out of the oven that evening when Marcus came barreling through my front door like he was still 16 and late for curfew. "Ma!" he called, and that voice of his filled up the house the way good smells do. "We're here." I was standing by the stove in my church blouse, the soft blue one with the loose sleeves that made me feel just a little fancy. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and peeked around the corner into the living room. Marcus stood there in a charcoal button-down, cleaner and sharper than I was used to seeing him outside of Easter service. He'd always been handsome, but something about him that night looked settled, like he'd finally grown into the man I'd been trying to raise. Beside him stood a woman I'd only seen in pictures up until then. "Ma, this is Alana," he said, grinning so big his eyes practically disappeared. "My fiancée." She was pretty in a soft way, round brown eyes, warm caramel skin, hair in a twist-out that framed her face. She wore a cream-colored dress with sleeves and a little gold cross at her throat. Her nails were done, But not those long, wild things the girls on Instagram wear. Simple. Elegant. Nice to finally meet you, Miss Denise, she said, stepping forward with both hands out like she meant it. I've been bugging Marcus about this for months. I took her hands. They were smaller than mine, cooler. Nice to meet you, baby, I said, and I meant that too. Whatever else might be true later in that moment, all I saw was the way she looked at my son, like she was proud to stand next to him. Marcus bounced on his heels a little. Ma, tell me you made the mac and cheese. Please tell me you did. I laughed. You think I'm gonna invite people over and not make the mac and cheese? Boy, stop. He kissed my cheek, then did that quick scan of the house he always did, checking who'd been here, what was different, like it was still partly his domain. You two sit, I said. Food's almost ready. We moved into the dining room, where I'd put my best effort forward. The good tablecloth, the one with no stains, my thrift store candle holders with fresh candles in them, real glasses instead of the plastic cups I used when it was just me. Marcus pulled out a chair for Alana. Ma went all out, he said. Of course she did, she replied, smiling at me. She's meeting her daughter-in-law. That word, daughter-in-law, landed in the room like a soft blanket and a small stone at the same time. I busied myself with plates, reaching for the serving spoons. Alana, I said. How do you spell your last name again? I want to make sure I get it right when I start practicing my cursive for the wedding invitations. She laughed a little. Oh, you don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, I teased. But I'm old school. I like to see names on paper. She hesitated for a tiny second. It would have been nothing to most people. But I have spent my life reading faces in waiting rooms and reception chairs. Parker, she said. Parker. The room went quiet in my head for a beat. Even though Marcus was still talking about traffic and parking and something about somebody cutting him off on the highway. Parker. There are a lot of Parkers in the world, I told myself. Still, I felt a little prickle crawl up the back of my neck. Parker, I repeated lightly, setting a dish on the table. That's a strong name. Yeah, Marcus said, taking his seat. Her dad's real proud of it. He's old school about that kind of thing. Wants to walk her down the aisle, all that. I forced a smile. Does he now? Alana's eyes flickered to mine for just a second. There was something there, a flash of discomfort maybe, of warning. She took a sip of water, swallowed. He's very involved, she said carefully. My dad is. Especially with family stuff. I nodded, trying to keep my face still, my voice calm. Nothing wrong with that. But in my chest, a door I thought I'd locked a long time ago creaked open. We ate. I smiled where I was supposed to smile, laughed where I was supposed to laugh. I asked all the right questions. About her job at the nonprofit, about the little apartment they were hoping to move into, about her mother's health, her favorite food, how the two of them met. They told me their story, how Marcus had gone to fix a printer at her office and ended up staying an hour talking, how she'd given him her number written on the back of a sticky note that still lived in his wallet. It was sweet, the kind of meet-cute you hear in movies. But underneath all that sweetness, my mind kept circling that one word. Parker. Every time I heard it, I could see dark eyes across a diner table and a wedding ring shining on the wrong hand. At one point, while Marcus was telling a story with his whole body, hands waving, chair tilted back, almost knocking over his glass, I glanced at Alana's phone peeking out of her purse beside her chair. The case was clear, with a little strip of paper tucked inside like a label. It said, A. Parker, in neat, rounded handwriting. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on dessert. It wasn't until I got behind the doorway, out of their line of sight, that I realized my hands were shaking. I leaned on the counter, listening to the faint clink of forks and the murmur of my son's voice. Parker, I whispered to myself. Lord, if this is a coincidence, you need to help my heart catch up. And if it's not. I didn't finish that sentence. Because I didn't know yet whether I was praying for a coincidence or a confrontation. That was before she followed me into the kitchen. Before she grabbed my wrist with those cold fingers. Before she asked me to keep quiet about a man who had once almost cost me my son. She came into the kitchen quieter than I expected for somebody wearing heels on old tile. I had my back to the doorway, pretending to be very interested in the sweet potato casserole, even though it was already done. The oven ticked softly as it cooled. Out in the dining room, Marcus's laugh rolled through the house, easy and full. "Miss Denise," she said soft. I turned, dish towel still in my hand. "Yes, baby." Up close, without Marcus's arm around her or a smile for the room, she looked younger. Her lipstick had faded a little from dinner. There was a small crease between her eyebrows, like she'd been holding a thought in too long. She glanced toward the doorway, then stepped all the way into the kitchen and nudged the door until it was almost closed. That's when she reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her hand was cold. Not ice cold, just that kind of chill that comes from nerves. "Please don't tell him how you know my father," she whispered. Old Denise might have snatched her hand away. This version of me just looked at her. "How do you know I know your father?" I asked quietly. She swallowed. Her eyes were shining, but she wasn't crying yet. "Because I saw your face when Marcus said his name. You went pale. And then you didn't say anything when he talked about him walking me down the aisle. You just went somewhere else. I thought I'd hidden that." "What's your father's name?" I asked, even though my heart had already answered. "Charles," she said. "Charles Parker." There it was, laid on my counter like a piece of raw meat. Charles Parker. 28 years peeled back in an instant. The dingy light of a diner at midnight. The smell of burnt coffee. A man in a pressed shirt, tie loosened, wedding ring gleaming when he reached for his wallet in my hand instead. I met Charles when I was 26, working nights at a little diner off the highway. Marcus was 7 then, all elbows and questions, growing faster than my paycheck could keep up with. I worked days at the clinic, then picked up the night shift at the diner 3 times a week because rent and school clothes and car repairs don't care if you're tired. He came in the first time on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were dead. 2 truckers at the counter, a couple arguing in a booth in the corner, and that was it. I was wiping down the sugar containers, half listening to the radio. The bell over the door jingled and in he walked, tall, dark suit, tired eyes, loosened tie. Not the usual kind of man who came in that late. He sat at the counter. "Coffee?" I asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, a little worn at the edges. "Whatever's strongest." "It's been a day." He took off his jacket, laid it over the stool next to him like he was expecting company, then shrugged and left it there anyway. I poured his coffee. He watched my hands. "You work here nights a lot?" he asked. I laughed. "Feels like it." He smiled a little. "I'm Charles." "Denise," I said. "You want a menu or just the usual?" He chuckled. "Don't have a usual yet. First time here. Place looked familiar, I guess. Like home used to." That line hooked me more than it should have. We talked. Nothing big that first night, just small talk about the weather, how his job kept him on the road, and how 7-year-olds ask better questions than half my coworkers. "Got one of those at home," I said, leaning on the counter. 7-year-old, not coworker. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "Boy." "Marcus." His face softened. "You look too young to have a 7-year-old. I started early," I said. "Life doesn't always wait till you're ready." He looked down at his hands then, twisting his ring. That should have been my clue. But when you're that tired and that lonely, and someone looks at you like you're the most interesting thing in a place full of cracked vinyl and fluorescent lights, you don't always listen to the right clues. He became a regular. Tuesdays, Thursdays, sometimes Fridays if he was in town. He always sat in my section. He'd ask about Marcus, about my day. He remembered small things, that I liked my coffee with 2 sugars, that my left knee hurt when the weather changed, that my favorite song on the old radio was the one with the saxophone solo. One night, when the rush was over and the cook was smoking out back, I leaned against the counter and said, "So Charles, you got a family somewhere? Or is it just you and that briefcase?" He hesitated just long enough. "I'm married," he said. "Have a daughter. She's about your boy's age." He watched my face carefully. I nodded like my heart hadn't just tripped over itself. "They live here." "No," he said quickly. "Out of town. We're complicated." Complicated. It's funny, the words people use when they don't want to say, "I'm lying to her and to you." I told myself I understood. My own life wasn't exactly a straight line. We danced around it for months. He'd flirt, then pull back. I'd ask about his complicated marriage. He'd sigh and say things like, "You deserve better than hearing about my mess." The night it finally crossed the line, it was raining. I just finished a double shift. Marcus was at my sister's house, sleeping on her couch with a bowl of popcorn somewhere near his head. Charles offered me a ride. "It's pouring," he said, standing at the diner door with his umbrella. "You really want to wait on that bus?" I should have said yes. Instead, I looked out at the water bouncing off the pavement, felt the ache in my feet and said, "Okay, just this once." The car smelled like his cologne, wood and something sweet. The windows fogged a little. He kept both hands on the wheel at first, eyes on the road making small talk. Then at a red light he looked over at me. "You ever feel like," he said quietly, "you're always the one people depend on, and nobody ever asks what you want?" I swallowed. "All the time." His gaze dropped to my mouth just for a second. He kissed me in my parking lot. I remember the sound of the rain on the roof, the way my keys dug into my palm, the guilt, the thrill all twisted up together. "I shouldn't," I whispered. "I know," he said. "Me neither." We both did it anyway. Back in my kitchen years later, I blinked and came back to the present. Alana was still holding my wrist. "Please," she said again. "Don't tell him." I gently slid my hand out of her grip and set the dish towel down. "Does Marcus know anything?" I asked. "About your father? About his history?" She shook her head, a quick, almost panicked movement. "He knows my parents had a rough patch when I was little. That's it. He doesn't know names or details. He just knows they almost divorced once." "And what do you know?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, steady now. "I know my father cheated on my mother," she said, the words like stones. "I know he did it with a woman who had a little boy. I know my mother found out and almost left but stayed for me. I know I hated that woman for years without even knowing her name." My throat went dry. She took a shaky breath. "Then I was cleaning out some old boxes one day last year and found a stack of letters. From her. To him. With your name on a return address." I felt like the floor had dropped an inch. "So yes," she said softly. "I know who you are, Miss Denise." There it was. The past naming me. For a second, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator. "How long have you known Marcus was my son?" I asked. "Since the first month we were dating," she said. "When he told me his mom's name and that she used to work nights at a diner off Route 7. I went home and asked my mother straight out. She went white as a sheet." I could imagine that scene. Her mother's face. The way shame makes people small. "She told me bits and pieces," Alana continued. "Her version, of course. How you knew he was married. How you didn't care. How you almost ruined our family." The old defensiveness flared in me, hot and sharp. "Your father didn't tell me his marriage was fine," I said. "He told me he was sleeping on the couch, that they were basically separated, that he was leaving as soon as he got things in order." Alana nodded. "I'm not saying you're the only one at fault. I know my father. He's charming when he wants to be. And selfish. I figured if he lied to my mother, he probably lied to you too." She leaned back against the counter, arms folded now, hugging herself. "But here's the thing," she said quietly. "That was 20-something years ago. I was a kid. Marcus was a kid. You were what, in your 20s? My father was in his 30s, pretending not to be married when it suited him. And now finally I have something good. We have something good." Her voice cracked. "I don't want my parents' mess to ruin my life again." I watched her as she spoke, and I saw two people at once. I saw the daughter of the man who'd told me, in a motel room with cheap curtains, that he wished Marcus was his. And I saw a young woman who had grown up in the fallout of that lie, who'd had to live with her mother's bitterness and her father's guilt. "You think me telling Marcus the truth will ruin everything," I said slowly. "I think it'll make him look at me differently," she whispered. "Like I'm contaminated by what my father did. Like I'm my father's sin walking around in a white dress." My chest tightened. "You're not your father's sin, Alana." She gave a bitter little smile. "Tell that to the part of me that still remembers my mom sleeping on the couch and crying quietly at night. Tell that to the part of me that blamed myself, then blamed her, then blamed every woman he ever smiled at that wasn't my mom." She straightened up, wiping quickly under one eye. "I'm not asking you to lie," she said. "I'm just asking you, please don't volunteer it. Not now." Not like this. Let my relationship with Marcus be about us, not about them. I looked toward the dining room. I could hear Marcus chuckling to himself, probably scrolling on his phone while he gave us girl time. For a moment I was back in my old apartment, Marcus at 8 years old, staring at me with eyes too old for his face, asking, "Ma, why was that lady yelling at you in the parking lot? Why did she call you a homewrecker?" I had almost lost him that day. That memory sat heavy in my mouth. "I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet," I said honestly. "I need time to think. To pray." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay. That's fair. I don't deserve more than that." "You deserve the truth," I said. "All of us do. The question is when and how and to whom." She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Can we just go back in there and enjoy tonight?" she asked. "Just for a little while?" I promised myself I'd have at least one good memory of us all together before anything blows up. Her choice of words made something sting behind my eyes. "Yeah," I said softly. "We can do that." We walked back into the dining room side by side. To anyone looking, we probably looked like any future mother and daughter-in-law clearing dishes together. Only the two of us knew we were also carrying the weight of a man named Charles Parker on our backs. That night, after they left, Marcus stood in the doorway with his jacket over his arm. "So?" he asked, boyish grin back on his face. "What do you think?" He meant about the woman he loved. He had no idea I was also thinking about the man who had almost made him hate me. I dried my hands slowly on the towel, buying a second. "She's kind," I said. "Smart. I can tell she loves you." His shoulders relaxed, relief washing over his features. "Good. I really want y'all to be close." He hesitated. "You seemed a little, I don't know, off at dinner. You sure you're okay?" I looked at my son, my miracle, my second chance, the boy I'd vowed to never again risk for anybody's sweet words or tired hands. "I'm okay," I lied. "I'm just getting used to the idea that my baby's getting married." He laughed, came over and kissed my forehead. "I'll always be your baby, Ma." As the door closed behind him, the house felt too quiet again. Only this time the silence had a name. Parker. And whether I liked it or not, that name was about to be printed on wedding invitations with my sons. Sleep did not come easy that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the occasional car rolling past outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two faces flicker back and forth. Alana's in my kitchen, young, scared, pleading. And behind her, like a ghost layered right on top, Charles's in that diner booth in my apartment doorway, in the parking lot where everything finally broke. Some memories don't fade so much as blur at the edges. But that day in the parking lot, that one is as clear as glass. Marcus was 8 when Charles's wife found me. I had already ended it with him, at least in my mind. The guilt had gotten too loud. Each time he kissed me goodbye and went home, I'd see my own reflection in the dark TV screen and hardly recognize myself. One night after he left, Marcus came out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Ma," he'd said, voice small, "how come that man goes away at night? Is he my new daddy?" Something in me snapped clean in two. The next time Charles showed up at my door, I didn't let him in. "We're done," I'd said, standing in the doorway with my arms folded. He'd frowned. "You say that every time you get in your head. Baby, we're." "I mean it," I said. "Marcus is confused. I'm confused. Your wife is probably confused if she has any idea who you really are. I can't do this no more." He tried to charm me, then to guilt me, then to argue. I held my ground even as my chest ached. "Fine," he'd finally snapped. "Do what you want. But don't you dare make me the villain to that boy. I care about him." "You don't get to care about my son and still go home to your daughter," I said. "That's not how this works." I closed the door on him for the last time. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I was walking Marcus home from school, his little hand in mine, chattering about spelling tests and how his friend Jamal had traded him half a sandwich for a juice box. The sun was bright. The air smelled like cut grass. We cut through the corner store parking lot like we always did. That's when I heard it. "Denise." A woman's voice, sharp enough to slice. I turned. She was standing by a beige sedan, keys in her hand, shoulders heaving. Her hair was pulled back too tight, like she'd done it in a hurry. She had on a skirt suit, but one button was undone, and her shoes looked like she'd walked a mile in them. I'd never seen her in person, but I knew who she was. You don't spend months with a man and not know the outline of the life he's supposed to have. Can I help you? I asked, even though my stomach had already dropped. You can help me by staying away from my husband, she spat, taking a step forward. Her eyes flicked down to Marcus. And from my family. Marcus squeezed my hand harder. Ma, he whispered. Come on, baby, I said, trying to steer him away. We don't need to. She moved faster than I expected. She stepped right into our path. Look at you, she hissed. Dragging your child into your filth. You should be ashamed. Ma, what is she talking about? Marcus's voice was louder now, scared. People were looking. A man pumping gas glanced over. The cashier from the corner store came halfway out the door, then retreated when he saw the storm brewing. I ended it, I said quietly. I told him not to come back. I told him. You told him what? She cut in. That you'd wait? That you'd keep the bed warm while he pretended to be a father? You think you're the first woman he's tried this with. That stung more than I care to admit. I didn't know it was like that, I said. Not at first. He lied to me. He's a liar, but you're a homewrecker, she snapped. You knew he had a wife. You knew he had a daughter. And you still opened your door. You still opened your... Stop, I said sharply, glancing down at Marcus. Don't do this in front of the kids. Oh, now you care about the kids, she laughed bitterly. You didn't care when you were playing house with mine. Marcus tugged harder. Ma, he said, voice tight. Why is she calling you that? What did you do? My throat closed. I looked at my son, his wide eyes, his backpack slipping off one shoulder, and realized in that moment that whatever explanation I gave him was going to stick in his head for a very long time. I made a mistake, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. A big one. That's all you need to know right now. The other woman snorted. A mistake is burning dinner. This is sin. She turned on her heel and got back in her car, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. A moment later, the sedan peeled out of the lot, tires squealing. The silence she left behind was louder than her voice had been. Marcus pulled his hand out of mine. Is it true? He asked, standing there between parked cars and grocery carts. Did you do something with her husband? I stared at the cracked pavement. Yes, I said. I did. Why? He demanded. You always tell me not to lie, not to steal, not to do bad stuff. Why did you do it? There's a special kind of shame that comes with being caught being exactly what you warned your child not to be. I was lonely, I said honestly, and tired, and he told me things that made me feel seen. But none of that makes it right. It just makes it real. He frowned, trying to process adult failure with a child's brain. Am I a mistake? He asked suddenly. The question sliced through me. Never, I said, dropping to my knees right there in the parking lot so I was eye level with him. You hear me, Marcus James? Never. You are the best thing I ever did. The only mistake I made was letting someone into our life who didn't deserve to be there. He looked at me for a long moment, his little chest rising and falling under his backpack straps. Are you still seeing him? He asked. No, I said. And I won't. Ever again. Promise. Promise. It took time after that for him to trust that answer. He was quieter for a while. Watched me more. Asked where I was going even when I was just stepping outside to get the mail. I took it. I took all of it because I knew I'd set that fire myself. And I promised, in a parking lot that still smells like gasoline in my memory, that I would never again risk my son's trust for a man. Any man. Back in the present, that promise hummed in my ears as I washed dishes in my sink. The plates from dinner were stacked by the drying rack. The candle in the dining room had melted down to a little pool of wax. The house was quiet again. I dried my hands and went to my bedroom, pulled out the old shoebox from the back of my closet. Most people keep their ghosts in photo albums. I kept mine in envelopes. Inside were a few things I hadn't been able to make myself throw away. A couple of cards from my own father before he passed, a Polaroid of Marcus losing his first tooth, and buried under those 3 letters in handwriting I knew better than I wanted to. Charles's. I hadn't read them in years. I kept them mostly as a reminder of who I never wanted to be again. I unfolded the top one. Dear Denise, it began. I know you said not to write, but I can't just let you walk away like that. I didn't need to read the rest. I remembered every line, every excuse, every half-promise. I folded it back carefully. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over Facebook for a second. Social media had never been my thing like it was for the younger folks, but I knew enough to know that if you wanted to find somebody, you started there. I typed in Charles Parker. Hundreds of results came up, different faces, different cities. I added the state I knew he'd been living in back then. The list got shorter. Then I saw him. Older. Grayer around the temples. A little thicker in the middle. But those eyes were the same. So was the bent of his smile, like he was always holding back a secret. His profile picture showed him standing next to a woman at what looked like a backyard barbecue. She wore a floral dress. Her arm was looped through his, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I recognized that woman too. Not from real life, but from the photo he'd once pulled out of his wallet and slid quickly back when he saw my face fall. His wife. Alana's mother. I clicked on his profile. Some posts were public. Proud dad moment. My baby girl got engaged, read one caption under a photo of Alana and Marcus, his arm around her, her ring hand pressed to his chest. The comments were full of congratulations. One caught my eye. All that trouble y'all went through, and look at God now. From a woman whose last name I didn't know. I clicked back, found another picture. Alana between her parents at what looked like an engagement party. Her mother's smile was wider there, but her hand on Charles's shoulder looked careful, like she was still holding on to something she didn't want to drop again. I scrolled further down. There were church event photos, a few corny memes, a post about, "No one will ever know how hard we fought for this marriage but God." They had clearly stayed together. They had clearly done at least some of the work it takes to patch something that's been ripped. I sat back on my bed, phone in my lap. On one hand, seeing them still married made my stomach twist. It forced me to remember that while I had eventually come to my senses and slammed the door, there had been months, maybe years, of fallout in that house I never had to live through. On the other hand, it made something else clear. Whatever story they had told themselves to survive, I was part of their testimony now, whether I liked it or not. And my son was about to marry their daughter. The next morning, Marcus called me on his way to work, as he often did. "Morning, Ma," he said. I could hear his blinker ticking over the phone. "You okay after last night? Didn't overwhelm you too much, did we?" "I'm fine," I said. "Y'all are a lot of joy. It's a good overwhelm." He laughed. There was a pause. "Ma," he said, voice turning a shade more serious, "can I ask you something? For real?" "Always," I said, bracing myself. "What did you think about her parents coming over next week? We want to do an engagement dinner, both families together, you know? Alana's real big on breaking bread, and all that." My grip tightened on the phone. "Next week," I repeated. "Yeah, we were thinking Saturday. Her folks are finally free. You'll like her mom, I think. She's kinda quiet but sweet. Her dad's, he's a character. Old school, but he loves his girl." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Marcus," I said carefully, "you know I always want to support you. But before I sit across a table from them, there's some history I might need to tell you about." He was quiet for a beat. "History?" he echoed. "Like what?" I closed my eyes. This was the cliff I'd been edging toward since Alana set Parker in my dining room. I could feel that same old fear, the fear of seeing disappointment in his face, of him pulling his hand out of mine again like he did in that parking lot. But I also knew what happened when people hid too much for too long. Secrets don't dissolve. They ferment. "I think," I said slowly, "we need to have a conversation. Just you and me. Before that dinner." He let out a small, nervous laugh. "You're scaring me, Ma." "I'm not trying to," I said softly. "But I would rather you hear it from my mouth than from somebody else's at a table full of food." He sighed. "Okay. When?" "Tonight," I said. "If you can. Come by after work. We'll start there." "All right," he said quietly. "I'll be there." When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the table. "Tonight." I had hidden this part of my life from my son for over 20 years, telling myself it was to protect him. Now I was about to hold it up to the light and see whether it still had the power to burn us both. Marcus showed up that evening with a grocery bag in his hand and worry on his face. He'd stopped by the little deli near his job. I could smell fried chicken through the thin plastic before he even crossed the threshold. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up the bag like a peace offering. "Figured if we're having some big serious talk, we shouldn't do it on empty stomachs." I managed a smile. "You do listen to me sometimes." "Sometimes," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "You okay?" I'd set the kitchen table earlier. Nothing fancy, just 2 plates, 2 glasses, the salt and pepper. It looked too small for the size of what we were about to put on it. "I'm all right," I said. "Tired, but all right." We ate first because I didn't trust myself to get through the story on a growling stomach either. He talked a little bit about work, about some coworker who microwaved fish and got cussed out by half the office. I laughed in the right place, but he could tell I was just going through motions. When the plates were mostly empty and the silence got too long, he leaned back in his chair and studied me. "Okay," he said. "Whatever this is, just say it, Ma. I can tell it's eating you up." My hands were folded so tight in my lap, I had to consciously unlace my fingers. "You remember," I began slowly, "when you were about 8, that woman in the corner store parking lot who yelled at me?" His brows drew together. "Vaguely," he said. "I remember a lady shouting. I remember you on your knees talking to me, telling me I wasn't a mistake. I never forgot that part." His eyes softened a little on that memory. I nodded. "Do you remember what she said to me?" He looked down at his plate, picking at a crumb with his thumb. "Not word for word," he said. "But I know she called you something ugly. Said you'd messed with her husband. I didn't really understand it, but I knew it was bad." He glanced back up at me. Was she telling the truth? I let that question sit there for a heartbeat because in a way it was the same one he'd asked me in that parking lot 2 decades before. "Yes," I said quietly. "She was." He inhaled sharply through his nose, but he didn't interrupt. "I told you I'd made a big mistake," I went on. "What I didn't tell you back then was who that man was." I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "His name was Charles Parker." Marcus blinked. For a second the name meant nothing. Then I saw it click in his mind like a switch being flipped. "Alana's dad?" he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes," I said. The room seemed to tilt a little. He leaned back in his chair, staring at me like he was trying to match up 2 photos that didn't quite line up. "You and her father," he trailed off, jaw tightening. "How? When?" I took a breath and told him. Not every detail. I didn't need to drag him through the mud of my loneliness, but enough. The diner. The late nights. The lies I believed because I wanted to. The way it had ended. The parking lot. The whole time he kept his eyes on me, not looking away, not pacing, not yelling. That almost made it harder. "When I ended it," I said, my voice shaking a little now, "I told myself that was it. That I would move on, that you'd never have to carry that part of my life. I thought if I kept it in the past, it would stay there." I gave a small, humorless laugh. Life doesn't always cooperate with our plans. He sat very still for a moment after I finished, his fingers pressed together in front of his mouth. "So when I brought Alana to dinner," he said slowly, "and I said her last name, you already knew." "I suspected," I said. "Parker's a common enough name. I was hoping, against reason, that it was just coincidence. But it wasn't." "No," I said. "It wasn't." He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. "So you've just been sitting with this?" he asked, pacing a small circle by the counter. "Knowing that the woman I want to marry is the daughter of the man you—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "Yes," I said. "For about 24 hours now. That's why I asked you to come talk. I didn't want to keep it from you." "You kind of already did," he snapped, then squeezed his eyes shut like he regretted it as soon as it came out. "Sorry. That's not fair." "It's fair to how you feel," I said quietly. "You're allowed to be mad." He shook his head, hands on his hips. "Does she know?" he asked. "Alana?" "Yes," I said. "She recognized my name. Found some of the old letters between me and her father. She asked her mother." They pieced it together. So she knew before I did, he said, half to himself. She knew when we started dating. I think she knew early on, yes, I said. But she also knows what her father did to her mother. I don't think she's proud of any of it. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. This is crazy. I know, I said. Believe me, I know. He stopped pacing and looked at me, something wounded in his eyes now. Ma, he said quietly, were there a lot of men like that? When I was a kid. The question hurt, but I understood why he was asking it. No, I said firmly. There was your father and his mess. Then a long time of just us. Then Charles for a few months when I was weaker than I should have been. After that, it was just us again. Sometimes a date here or there, nothing serious. I learned my lesson the hard way. He studied my face, trying to weigh my words against his memories. You never brought anybody else around, he said slowly. Just Charles that one time. And I remember that because I remember thinking, maybe this is how normal families are. His voice cracked on the last word. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from going to him right then. I thought if I told you the whole story, I said, it would put a stain on your childhood that you didn't choose. So I tried to carry it myself. How's that working out for you? He muttered, but there was less bite in it now, more tiredness. Not great, I admitted. Secrets have a way of walking themselves right back into your house. We were quiet for a minute. Finally, he sank back into his chair, elbows on the table, head in his hands. What am I supposed to do with this? He asked. Like, what's the takeaway here? Mom slept with my future father-in-law, and now we're all gonna eat potato salad together next week? Despite everything, I winced. It sounds terrible when you put it like that. It is terrible, he said, then sighed. But it's also old. He looked up, eyes redder now. Did you know he stayed with them? Her parents? That they worked it out? I saw, I said softly. I looked at his profile online. It seems like they chose to stay and try. He nodded slowly. Alana's told me bits about that time. Without the details. I knew he cheated and they almost split. I just never thought to ask names. He gave a harsh little laugh. This world really is small. I watched him trying to gauge where his anger was pointing. At me, at Charles, at random fate. I'm not telling you this to blow up your life, I said. I'm telling you because I don't want you walking into a room with people who know a different version of our history than you do. I don't want you blindsided at some family barbecue 10 years from now, when somebody drinks too much and starts telling old stories. He flinched at that image. So what now? He asked. You think I should call it off? Break up? Punish their whole family for what he did? For what you did with him? His words hit hard, but the question was honest. No, I said slowly. I don't think this automatically means you can't marry Alana. She didn't choose what her father did. Neither did you. Neither did I, in some ways. We all made our mistakes under different pressures. I swallowed. But I do think this means the four of us, me, you, her, and her mother, need to have a very grown conversation about boundaries, about honesty, about not carrying our parents' sins forward like family heirlooms. He rubbed his face with both hands. I can't believe I'm having to say the sentence my fiancé's dad slept with my mom, he muttered. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling too small. If I could go back and shake that girl I would. But all I can do now is tell you the truth and try to help you not repeat my patterns. He was quiet for a long time. I'm mad, he said finally. At him. At you. At the whole stupid situation. I know, I said. But, he added, exhaling, I'm also not 8 anymore. I've done some stuff I'm not proud of either. Not like this, he said quickly, looking up at me. But, I get how people can be lonely and stupid at the same time. He looked down at his hands. I love her, Ma, he said. That hasn't changed in the last hour. This just makes it messy, eh? Love is often messy, I said gently. The question is whether it makes you better in the long run, or just tired. He gave me a small sad half smile. That sounds like something you got from Auntie Mae videos. I got it from life, I said dryly. They just happen to agree sometimes. He sat back. So what do we do about Saturday? He asked. The dinner. I took a breath. This was the part that had been rolling around in my head all day. I said. Before we sit all together at a table, I need to talk to Alana's mother. Woman to woman. Not to rehash old pain, but to make sure we're on the same page about not using you two as emotional punching bags for what we went through. He nodded slowly. And her father? I met his eyes. With him, I said, I need boundaries. Firm ones. I don't need an apology for myself. I made my own choices. But I do need him to understand that if he tries any of that old charm, or if he ever disrespects this house, this marriage you're building, I will not stay quiet to keep the peace. And me? He asked. You, I said, need to decide what you can live with. Not tonight. Not even this week. But in the long run. Can you sit across from that man at holidays knowing what you know? Can you love a woman whose father hurt your mother, but also hurt her mother? Those aren't questions I can answer for you. He let out a breath like he'd been holding it his whole life. I hate this, he said. Me too, I admitted. But I don't hate you, he added, looking at me intently. You hear me? I'm mad. I'm disappointed. But I don't hate you. You're still my mom. Tears stung my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. He stood, walked around the table and hugged me. I could feel the muscles in his back tight from stress. I'm gonna go, he said after a minute, pulling back. Clear my head. Talk to Alana. Not about the details yet. Just that there's something we all gotta face. Okay, I said. Drive safe. As the door closed behind him, the house felt even quieter than the night before. But this time the silence wasn't full of secrets. It was full of the next hard step. 2 days went by before I heard anything. They were long days. The kind where you go through the motions, work, dishes, TV in the background, but your mind is off somewhere else, replaying the same conversation in different tones, wondering if you should have said more or less or nothing at all. On the third evening, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. It was a text from an unknown number. Hi, Ms. Denise. This is Alana. Do you have time to talk sometime this week? Just us two. I stared at the screen for a moment, then sat down on the edge of my bed. Yes, I wrote back. We should. When are you free? She suggested Saturday morning. A cafe halfway between my house and her parents' neutral ground. We both knew why that mattered. The cafe was one of those new places that tried to look old. Exposed brick walls, hanging plants, mismatched wooden chairs. The air smelled like espresso and cinnamon. Soft jazz played under the low hum of conversation. I got there early out of habit. Picked a corner table with the view of the door. My coffee sat cooling in front of me by the time she walked in. She was dressed down, jeans, a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a low puff. No makeup, or just enough that it didn't look like it. She scanned the room, saw me, and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since Tuesday. Hi, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Hey baby, I said. You all right? She gave a small, humorless laugh. Loaded question. We sat in a small bubble of silence for a moment, the clink of cups and hiss of the espresso machine filling the space. Did Marcus talk to you? I asked finally. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her mug. Yeah, he called that night. He told me you told him everything. I told him enough, I said. Not every ugly detail, but enough. She looked up at me. There was fear in her eyes, but also something steadier. I thought he was going to break up with me, she admitted. When he said, we need to talk about our parents. That's usually what comes right before. I don't think we should do this. My chest tightened. What did he say instead? He said, we're not them, she whispered. He said he was mad. At all of you. At all of us. But that he still loved me. And that if we walked away from each other, it would be because we chose it, not because of something two scared, selfish people did when we were kids. I felt a little wave of gratitude for my son then, like a warm hand on my back. He's a good man, I said softly. He had a good teacher, she replied, then glanced at me, a little embarrassed by her own words. We sat with that for a beat. I'm not here to defend myself, I said. I've been doing that in my head for years. I know what I did. I know what it cost people who didn't deserve it. Including you. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. I grew up hating you, she said plainly. Not you personally. Just the idea of you. The other woman. I thought if I ever met you, I'd spit in your face. I nodded slowly. That's fair. But then I found your letters, she went on. And the things my dad told you? He made it sound like he was practically single. Said they were done. Said they were only together on paper. Said he was staying for me, but that he was miserable. I saw the way you wrote back. You weren't bragging about stealing him. You were believing him. She let out a shaky breath. It messed with my head, she said. Because suddenly there wasn't one villain and one victim. There were just a bunch of people lying to themselves. I let that sit between us. When did you tell your mother? I asked. After I found the letters, she said. I brought them to her and said, Is this the woman? She turned the paper over like it might burn her hands. Then she sat down and cried. She stared into her coffee. She told me you were young, Alana said. That you were a single mom. That none of that excused it, but that she'd spent so long blaming you because it was easier than staying mad at him and still sleeping in the same bed. The honesty of that made my throat ache. I wanted to hate you, Alana continued. But somewhere in there I started pitying you too. Because I saw in your words the same thing I saw in her eyes. That kind of settling for crumbs of love. I promised myself I wasn't going to be either of you. And then you fell in love with my son, I said gently. And then I fell in love with your son, she echoed, a sad little smile tugging at her mouth. And God thought he was funny. I couldn't help it, I chuckled. He does have a sense of humor. We sipped our coffee in companionable silence for a minute. So why did you want to meet? I asked. What do you need from me? She looked up, expression earnest. I need to know what kind of future we're walking into, she said. Because my whole life my parents' unresolved mess has been like this fog in our house. Some days it's thin, some days it's so thick you can't see each other. I don't want that for me and Marcus. I don't want every Thanksgiving to feel like it's going to turn into a courtroom. I don't either, I said. I talked to my mom, she went on. Told her who you were. She already knew your name, obviously. But she didn't know we'd put it together. She cried again. Her voice softened. She said she was ashamed. Not of you. Of how long she held on to hating you instead of holding him accountable. I swallowed hard. She wants to meet you, Alana said. Properly. Not as the other woman. As the mother of the man I'm going to marry. She said if we're going to be family. She rolled the word in her mouth like it was foreign. Then the women need to at least be able to look each other in the eye without drowning. I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That sounds right, I said. Hard. But right. She nodded. My dad doesn't know yet. Not everything. He knows Marcus is your son. He has for a while. He put it together when he saw a picture on my phone. He got real quiet. The idea that he'd been silent in the background of this story for so long made my skin crawl a little. And what did he say? I asked. At first? Nothing, she said. Then he said, that was a long time ago. Then, it doesn't have to affect you. Then, don't tell your mother. I made a face before I could stop myself. Yeah, she said dryly. Same. I told him I wasn't keeping any more of his secrets. That if I was going to marry into this, it was going to be in the light or not at all. Somewhere behind her words, I heard the echo of the little girl who used to listen to quiet crying at night. She continued, he doesn't know you and I have talked. Or that you've told Marcus. I want it to give you space to decide how you want to handle him. Because frankly, she met my eyes. He should be the least of our priorities right now. I felt a small, unexpected kinship rise up in me at that. I agree, I said. Our children come first now. Not the men who hurt us. She exhaled, shoulders dropping a little. So, I said slowly, here's what I'm thinking. You tell me if this feels right. Or if I'm missing something. She nodded, listening. I'd like to meet your mother, I said. Before Saturday if she's willing. Somewhere quiet. Just us. Not to apologize for existing, but to acknowledge the harm and make it clear I'm not here to reopen wounds. Alana's eyes shimmered. I think she'd appreciate that. Then when we do that dinner, I went on, I think your father needs to be there. Not so we can all gang up on him, but because he's part of this whether we like it or not. I will be civil. But I won't pretend we're strangers either. If he tries to sweep it under the rug, I'm going to lift a corner. She half smiled at that image. I also think, I added, that you and Marcus need to set ground rules now. About what stories get told at family gatherings. About what's off limits. About not using each other as referees when old resentments flare. She nodded vigorously. Yes. Yes to all of that. And lastly, I said, I think you and I have an opportunity here to do something our mothers didn't get to do when they were our age. What's that? She asked. We can choose not to compete, I said simply. Not to measure who was more wronged, who hurt more, who won or lost him. We can look at each other and say, he did both of us wrong in different ways. And we are both more than what he did. Her lips parted slightly, like the idea had never quite been put that way for her before. I like that, she whispered. I want that. We sat there for a moment, two women linked by a man who wasn't even in the room, choosing instead to link ourselves to something else. To our own dignity. To our children's futures. All right then, I said, feeling a quiet resolve settle in my chest. Text your mother. See when she's free. She did, thumbs flying over her screen. A few seconds later her phone buzzed. She says she can do tomorrow afternoon, Alana reported. She suggests the park by the lake. Lots of people around. Neutral ground, her words, not mine. I smiled. She's a wise woman. She is, Alana said softly. Even when she's hurt. Aren't we all? I murmured. The next day I stood by the lake with my hands in the pockets of my cardigan, watching ducks glide across the water. The wind had a bite to it, carrying the smell of damp leaves and somebody's barbecue from a nearby picnic area. Children shrieked on the playground. A couple walked past holding hands, heads bent close. I saw her before she saw me. She'd aged, of course. We all had. Her hair had more silver in it now, cut shorter. There were lines around her mouth that hadn't been there in the profile pictures I'd scrolled through. But her posture, that straight back, that purposeful stride, that was the same as the woman who had faced me down in a parking lot all those years ago. Her eyes found me. She stopped a few feet away, clutching the strap of her purse like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Mrs. Parker, I said quietly. Denise, she replied. No Mississippi, no extra name. Just mine. For a moment we just looked at each other. All the words we could have thrown like stones lay unspoken between us. Thank you for coming, I said. She let out a short breath. I wasn't sure I would, she admitted. I've spent 20 years telling myself if I ever saw you again I don't know, slap you, bit at you, something ugly. But then my daughter called and said she loves your son. And that changed the math. There was no malice in her tone. Just exhaustion. I understand, I said. On all counts. We moved to a nearby bench, sitting at opposite ends at first, enough space between us for an invisible third person. Maybe the woman we both used to be. I folded my hands in my lap. I want to say I'm sorry, I began. And I know that probably sounds too small for what happened, but I am. I was wrong. I was selfish. I believed a man who told me what I wanted to hear instead of what was true. And even when I realized the full story, I took too long to walk away. She listened, her face unreadable. I don't expect forgiveness from you, I said. I don't even know if I'd want it if I were in your shoes. But I needed you to know I'd take responsibility for my part. She was quiet for a long moment. You know what I remember most about that time? She said finally, eyes fixed on the lake. Not the fighting. Not even the night I found the messages. I remember my daughter hiding in the hallway, listening to us yell, and thinking it was her fault. Then years later, I remember her bringing me that box of letters and asking me why I hated that woman more than I seemed to hate what her father did to me. Her voice wobbled. She was right, she continued. I did hate you more. Because I could put you somewhere else in my mind. You were an outsider. A threat. Hating him meant admitting I'd hitched my whole life to someone who might never be what he promised. That was too much to look at for a long time. I swallowed. I get that. She turned to me then, her gaze sharp. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you, she said. Not today. Maybe not ever fully. But I will tell you this. I'm tired. Tired of carrying you around in my body like a sickness. Tired of acting like my daughter can't have love because I was too scared to leave or make him leave when I should have. She took a breath. So here's what I'm willing to do, she said. I'm willing to sit at a table with you. I'm willing to look you in the eye. I'm willing to support our children if they want to be together. But I will not pretend it never happened. And I will not let him hide behind the story that it was just a mistake, and that we've all moved on if he tries it. Some of the tension in my shoulders eased. That's all I ask, I said. Truth, respect, boundaries. For them. She gave a small humorless smile. We really do sound like some church storytime ladies, she said. Talking about boundaries by the lake. I laughed a real laugh this time. Better late than never. For the first time, something like a shared understanding passed between us. Not friendship. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something less sharp than what had been there before. Our children were about to build something new. The least we could do was not set it on fire from both sides. We decided to keep the engagement dinner at my house. Some people might have chosen a restaurant, neutral ground, easy exit, somebody else doing the dishes. But there was something important for me about having that conversation under my own roof. The same roof where I'd once cried over a man I had no business loving. The same roof where I had promised my son I would do better. This time I wanted the walls to hear something different. I cooked like my life depended on it. Not because I believed food could fix everything, but because it gave my hands something to do while my mind did heavier work. Collard greens simmering with smoked turkey, macaroni and cheese bubbling in the oven, cornbread in the cast-iron skillet, baked chicken seasoned the way Marcus liked. The house smelled like every holiday we'd ever had. I was setting the last fork when I heard a car door shut outside. My heart gave one hard thump. Marcus and Alana came in first, arm in arm. He kissed my cheek, his eyes searching mine for a second, making sure I was still standing. You good, he murmured. As I'll ever be, I said. Behind them, another couple appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Parker, her first name was Laverne I'd learned, stepped in with a casserole dish in her hands, like any other guest bringing a side. Her eyes swept the room quickly, measuring, bracing. Then Charles followed. For a moment the air felt thinner. He looked from me to Marcus to the table set for 6, then back to me. Recognition flared in his eyes, followed by something like shame, then quickly smoothed over with a practiced smile. Miss Denise, he said, voice just a little too bright. Long time. Mr. Parker, I replied, my tone even. Welcome. Come on in. He smelled like some expensive cologne I didn't recognize. Maybe that was part of his new life. New scent, same man. We did the awkward dance of coats and dishes and small talk. I complimented Laverne's dress. She complimented my house. Alana rushed to help me in the kitchen. Marcus poured drinks. For a few minutes, we all pretended this was any normal merging of families. We sat down to eat. I took my usual place at one end of the table. Marcus sat at the other. Alana and her parents on one side, me in an empty chair on the other that suddenly felt symbolic. We bowed our heads while Marcus said grace. Lord, he prayed, voice steady. Thank you for this food, for these hands that prepared it, and for the people around this table. Help us to speak truth, to show grace, and to not let the past steal what you're trying to bless in the present. Amen. Amen, we all echoed. We passed dishes, made appreciative noises about the food. Laverne's green bean casserole was genuinely good. There were a few minutes where conversation stayed safely on weather, work, and wedding colors. Then the moment came when Alana set her fork down and looked at her parents. Mom, Dad, she said quietly, we need to talk about something. All of us. Marcus reached for her hand under the table. I could see the movement in the way his arm shifted. Charles shifted in his chair, glancing between us. Talk about what? He asked, though his eyes already held a flicker of suspicion. Laverne glanced at me, then back at him. About the past, she said. And how it's sitting at this table whether we invite it or not. He cleared his throat. Laverne, we came here to celebrate. No need to dredge up. Charles, she said sharply, that old steel in her voice. We agreed. No more pretending. Not with our child's future on the line. He closed his mouth, jaw working. Alana took a breath. Dad, she said. I know who she is. There it was. No softening, no circling. His face went very still. Who she who is? He asked, buying time. Don't insult me, Alana said gently. Or yourself. I know who Miss Denise is. I found the letters. I talked to Mom. I put it together when I met Marcus. Silence. Outside, a car drove by, bass thumping faintly through the walls. Charles looked at me then, really looked like he was seeing the girl he'd met at the diner layered over the woman sitting at the end of this table. You told her? He asked Laverne, a threat of accusation in his voice. I told our daughter the truth, she said. Something we should have done a long time ago. He let out a humorless chuckle. Truth. Everybody's got their own version of that. I felt heat rise in my chest. I only have one version, I said quietly. The one where I knowingly got involved with a married man. The one where I hurt your wife and endangered my own child's trust. The one where, eventually, I chose to stop. That's the truth I live with. His eyes flashed. You weren't the only one who made choices, he said. I was there too. I never forced you. No, I cut in. You didn't. You opened a door and I walked through it. We both own that. What we're not going to do tonight is pretend it was a harmless fling that nobody carried scars from. Laverne's eyes met mine for a second. A small nod passed between us. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Parker, he said, sounding more like a man than I'd ever heard him. I appreciate that you're here. I respect that you stayed and did whatever work you did to keep your family together. But for Alana and me to move forward, I need us all to be honest about what we're stepping over. Charles looked at his daughter, at the way her fingers tightened around Marcus's. What exactly do you want from me? He asked, a trace of defensiveness still in his tone. You want me to blow up 20 years of recovery? Rehash every fight we had? For what? For clarity, Alana said softly. So this doesn't become another secret that rots everything from the inside. He rubbed a hand over his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. I made a mistake, he said finally. A bad one. I hurt your mother. I lied to Denise. I confused a little boy who didn't need another man walking in and out of his life. I've spent 2 decades trying to be a better husband and father than that man was. He glanced at me. Does that change what I did back then? No. But I can't live in 1998 forever, either. I studied him. There were shadows there I hadn't seen when I was young. Regret, maybe. Or just the weariness of a man who'd run out of excuses. I don't need you to live there, I said. I just need you to acknowledge it happened. So that when we're all in a room together in the future, we're not acting like we met for the first time over potato salad. A corner of his mouth twitched despite himself. That's fair, he admitted. Laverne shifted in her chair, her voice steady. Here's what I need, she said, looking at him. I need you to not use phrases like a mistake, like you misplaced your keys. I need you to understand that what you and she gestured toward me, did shook the foundation of our home. I chose to stay. That was my decision. But the cracks are still there. I have learned to walk around them. I do not want my daughter to have to build her house on the same fault lines. Alana reached out and covered her mother's hand with her own. It was one of the most tender things I'd ever seen. Charles's face crumpled just a little. Laverne, he said, voice low. How many times do I have to say I'm sorry? As many times as it takes for you to stop acting like we should all be grateful you didn't leave, she replied, but there was less venom in it than there might have been years ago. Marcus spoke up again. Look, he said, none of us invited this connection. I didn't fall in love with Alana because of what happened with y'all. I did it in spite of it without knowing. Same for her. But now that we do know, we get to decide what we do with it. He looked from his future in-laws to me. I want to marry her, he said plainly. That hasn't changed. I want our kids, your grandkids, to be able to come to both their grandmothers' houses without walking through a minefield of old drama. That means we all have to be grown about this. He turned to Charles. I don't need you to grovel, Marcus said. That's between you and God and your wife. But I do need you to respect my mother. That means no little jokes. No rewriting history as if she chased you down. No subtle digs at who she used to be. If I see that, or if I hear it from either of these women, I will not stay quiet. There was my boy. I felt both proud and a little sad that he had to carry this kind of conversation. Charles studied him, seeing not just the kid from the parking lot, but the man sitting at the head of the table now. "You sound like a father already," he said softly. "I sound like a son who watched his mother ache," Marcus replied. "And a man who's not about to make his wife or his kids watch that on repeat." Something in Charles's posture sagged. The fight went out of his shoulders. "All right," he said quietly. "Message received." He turned to me. "Denise," he said, and my name sounded strange in his mouth after all these years. "I am sorry. For lying. For putting you in a position that made people look at you like the whole mess was your fault. For confusing your boy. I can't undo it. But I can say that, at least." I looked at him for a long moment. Once that voice could have talked me into anything. Now all I felt was closure. "I accept that," I said. Not as a magic eraser. Just as a full stop at the end of an old sentence. He nodded, a small, grateful dip of his head. Laverne exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding a stone in her chest, and finally set it down. Alana squeezed Marcus's hand. He squeezed back. The air in the room shifted just a degree. We didn't suddenly become one big happy family in that moment. There was no group hug, no swelling music. But we had done something important. We had named the elephant, looked it in the eye, and told it where it was allowed to stand. Not between us. Never again between them. As the night went on, conversation eased into lighter things. Wedding dates. Guest lists. Who was going to cook what for the reception? At one point, while Marcus and Charles were in the living room talking about football, Laverne and I found ourselves side by side at the sink, washing and drying dishes like women have been doing together since the beginning of time. She handed me a wet plate. I dried it and put it in the cabinet. "I didn't think we'd ever get here," she said quietly. "Me either," I replied. She glanced at me. "If she makes you a grandmother before she makes me one," she said, a hint of playfulness in her voice, "I'm going to be upset." I laughed. "We'll be upset together." We shared a small smile. It wasn't forgiveness, not all at once. But it was something softer than resentment. Something closer to peace. Later, after they left and the house was quiet again, I stood in the doorway of my kitchen and looked at the table. Same table. Same chairs. New story. There were no raised voices echoing in my ears. No slamming doors. Just the faint clink of dishes in the drying rack, and the smell of cooling food. My past had sat at that table with my present and my future. And for once, it hadn't swallowed the room. It had simply taken its proper place. Behind us, not in front. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale after that dinner. There were still awkward pauses. Still moments when someone's eyes slid away at the mention of back when we were younger. Still times my heart thudded a little too fast when my phone buzzed late at night. Old instincts waking up before I could tell them to lie back down. But there was also something I hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. Not joy, not yet. Just the absence of that heavy, unnamed thing I'd been dragging behind me all those years. The weekend after our dinner, Marcus and Alana came by with a stack of wedding magazines and a notebook that already had more color-coded tabs than I knew what to do with. "We want both of you involved," Alana said, flipping to a page dog-eared and highlighted. "You and my mom. We're thinking 2 mother-son dances, 2 mother-daughter moments, all that." "Y'all just want twice the tears," I teased. "Absolutely," Marcus said. "We're aiming for maximum waterworks." We laughed, easy and genuine. For a whole hour, we talked about centerpieces and playlists and whether we could get Deacon Harris to promise not to talk more than 5 minutes if we let him bless the food. Felt normal. Messy normal. The way family planning always is. Later that week, Laverne and I met up at the bridal shop, to be the voice of reason, as Alana put it. We sat side by side on a plush bench while she tried on dress after dress, stepping out from behind the curtain with a shy smile each time. "That one makes you look like you can't breathe," I'd say. "That one looks like it's wearing you, not the other way around," Laverne would add. We were honest but kind. When she finally stepped out in a soft lace gown that made her eyes shine and her whole posture change, we both knew. "Oh," Laverne breathed, hand over her mouth. I felt my own eyes sting. "That's the one," I said. "That's your dress." Alana looked at herself in the mirror, then turned to face us. "You sure?" she asked, biting her lip. "We're sure," we said in unison. Our eyes met over her shoulder. A small surprised smile tugged at both our mouths. We were, for that moment, not rivals. Not reminders. We were just two mothers watching their child step into a new story. The wedding came on a warm spring afternoon. The church was decorated with simple white flowers and greenery. Nothing too fancy. Marcus stood at the front in a navy suit, looking like the little boy who used to run up and down my hallway, and the grown man he'd become all at once. I walked him down the aisle. People like to act like that's only a father's job, but my son only made it to that church because I'd carried him through a whole lot of other aisles, of grocery stores, of rent offices, of hospital waiting rooms. So when he asked me, "Ma, will you walk with me?" I said yes without a second thought. His arm was solid under my hand. My heels clicked softly against the tile. "You okay?" I whispered. "Nervous," he whispered back, but in a good way. We reached the front. I kissed his cheek and placed his hand in the pastor's, then stepped to the side, heart full. The doors opened. Alana walked in on her father's arm. For a second, past and present overlapped. The same broad shoulders I remembered from my doorway, now stooped just a little. The same hand that had once held mine now holding his daughter's. My chest tightened. Then my eyes shifted to her. She was radiant. Not because of the dress, though it was beautiful. Not because of the light coming through the stained glass. Because of the way she looked at my son, like she'd chosen him. Fully. In spite of everything. In full awareness of who he was and where he came from. Charles's jaw was tight. I could see the muscle working as they walked. When they reached the front, he kissed her cheek. For a brief moment, his eyes flicked to me. Not with longing. Not with regret he wanted me to soothe. Just with a quiet, tired acknowledgement. Then he stepped back and took his place beside Laverne, who slipped her hand into his. She didn't cling. She didn't flinch. She just held on. The ceremony was short and sweet. They said vows they'd written themselves, trembling a little on the words about breaking cycles and choosing honesty even when it hurts. The pastor looked a little surprised at that line but recovered quickly. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the room burst into applause. I clapped until my hands stung. At the reception there was food and music and cousins dancing badly. Kids ran around the hall, someone's baby cried through the speeches, and Auntie sang too loud during the slow songs. It was chaos in the best way. During the mother-son dance, Marcus held me close while some old R&B song played. "Thank you," he murmured into my hair. "For what?" I asked. "For telling me the truth," he said. "For not letting your shame decide my future. For being here like this instead of hiding in the back somewhere." I pulled back to look at him. "You did your own choosing too," I said. "Don't give me all the credit." He smiled, that little boy smile I thought I'd left back in the schoolyard. "Still," he said, "I'm glad you're my mom." "I'm glad you're my son," I replied. Across the room, I saw Alana dancing with her father. Her head rested on his shoulder. His eyes were closed, his lips moving like he was praying. Maybe for forgiveness, maybe for strength not to mess this up for them. At one point, he opened his eyes and glanced over at me. We both raised our cups, a small silent toast across the crowded room. Not to us. To them. Months turned into a year. They moved into a little apartment, then into a slightly bigger one. Work, bills, normal married arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Our families found a rhythm. Laverne and I swapped recipes and prayer requests. We shared a look when Charles said something that sounded a little too close to the man he used to be, and he'd catch himself, clear his throat, and try again. We weren't best friends. We didn't call each other to gossip. But when we saw each other at family dinners or church events, we hugged. Not tight, not long, but real. One Sunday after service, she pulled me aside in the fellowship hall. "I'm glad they didn't let us ruin this," she said. "So am I," I answered. We both knew who they were. Our children. And also the younger versions of ourselves who, given half a chance, might have kept bleeding for decades just to make a point. A year and a half after the wedding, they called us to their apartment for dinner. Marcus could barely keep still. Alana kept touching her stomach without realizing it. I knew before they said a word. "There's something we want to tell y'all," Marcus said, glancing at his wife, his grin almost splitting his face. Alana laughed, tears already in her eyes. "We're pregnant," she said. Laverne gasped. I put my hand over my mouth. For a second, all the air in the room was joy. We took turns hugging them, crying, laughing. Charles clapped Marcus on the back so hard he almost knocked him over. We argued over baby names even though they'd already picked two. We talked about cribs and diapers and who was going to babysit when. Later that night, when everyone else had gone home, I sat in my car for a minute before pulling off. Lord, I said out loud, looking up at the dark sky. I don't know what I did to get to see this. But thank you. Thank you for chances to do better with the next ones. The day my granddaughter was born, the hospital room was full. Laverne and I sat side by side in those uncomfortable vinyl chairs, taking turns holding this tiny, wrinkled, perfect little human who had no idea how many stories had been told before she even took her first breath. Charles hovered near the door, pacing, bringing water, pretending he wasn't wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Marcus stood by Alana's bed, their fingers laced together, all written all over his face. When it was my turn to hold her, I took her gently, cradling her against my chest. She was so light. I could feel her heartbeat, fast and insistent against my palm. Hey baby girl, I whispered. Welcome. Her tiny fingers curled around mine. I thought about all the women whose choices had led to this moment, good and bad, wise and foolish. My mother, who left before she could teach me much. Me stumbling through my 20s trying to make love out of crumbs. Laverne staying and fighting and sometimes breaking under the weight. Alana choosing to love in spite of it all. I bent my head and kissed my granddaughter's forehead. We're gonna try to do right by you, I murmured. All of us. Better than we did for ourselves. That's the promise. I looked up and caught Laverne watching me. We shared a look that said more than words could. We weren't best friends. We weren't enemies. We were two grandmothers standing on the edge of a new story, holding hands with the future in the shape of a baby girl. As I rocked her gently, the shame that had sat on my chest for so many years felt smaller. Not gone. The past is never gone. But no longer running the show. I had made terrible choices once. I had hurt people I didn't know and people I loved. I had tried to outrun my own reflection. In the end, the thing that saved me wasn't pretending it never happened. It was telling the truth when it mattered most, even when my voice shook. It was trusting that my son was strong enough to hear it and wise enough not to let it define him. It was watching a new generation come into the world and realizing that my job now wasn't to keep hiding my scars. It was to let them be warnings and not blueprints. Years later, when my granddaughter is old enough to ask questions, because children always do, I know at least some of this story will find its way to her ears. But by then, I hope she'll have more than one version to choose from. Not just a story about a man who cheated or the women who fell for him. A story about people who messed up and then one day, chose not to pass that mess on like an inheritance. A story about truth spoken late but not too late. A story about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your children is let them see who you really were so they can decide for themselves who they want to be.